start. Hey everybody, this is Laurie Meyer from stampedgreetings.com. And today I want to show you some tips and tricks on using a couple of pretty amazing products that are in the current Christmas or holiday catalog. And this is an example of a project that I made with those products. They include the Merriest Moments stamp set, which is really nice. A lot of winter items in here and some really nice sentiments that can be used for many different occasions, not only Christmas. It also has an embossing folder that can be used with some of the products. This is a hybrid embossing folder because there are dies that come with the embossing folder, and they can be used to make some of the really cool shapes that I use to make this card. Now, I'm not going to attempt or really try to embarrass you, but I'm going to say something that I bet all or most of you do. And here's my confession. Last year, when these products were in last year's holiday catalog, I bought them. I loved them. I thought I'm going to use them to make Christmas cards last year. Well, I didn't. In fact, it is the embarrassing truth to tell you that I have not opened those until a couple of weeks ago. And I'm sure there are things that are in your stash that probably fall into the same category. So don't feel that you're alone. I am really, really thrilled that Stampin' Up! Brought these products back. The dies, the embossing folder, and the stamp set can be found on page 23 of the current holiday catalog. And I want to show you how these work together. I am also going to be bringing in a designer series paper collection that also came back from last year. It is the gorgeous Painted Christmas collection, and that can be found on page 82. A lot of beautiful, beautiful colors and patterns that are in that. The best way for me to show you how to use some of the products that come in this, I'm not going to call it a bundle because it's not a bundle, but products that work together. We're going to see how to use those. And I'm just going to show you in a couple of steps. I'm going to grab the embossing folder. And this is the embossing folder. It's kind of hard to see on camera, but it is a 3D embossing folder. And you can see on this piece, this is the design that you get with the embossing folder. I used a piece of paper. This is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So it's a full quarter sheet. And I put that right into this embossing folder. And just like any of these that you use where you have a 3D embossing folder, just remember the plates that you're going to use. They're not the plates that are for the standard embossing folders. You need to make sure that if you've got a Stampin' Up! Embossing die cut machine, make sure you use plate number 4. If you have the old plates, you're going to use this purple plate. This is a specialty plate, and it will work beautifully when you use your 3D embossing folders. So that's one step. This is kind of the normal, if you want to think of it, a normal way to use an embossing folder. But there are many other ways to use this and to come up with some really cool designs. I'm just going to stack them up side by side, and then I'm going to show you how each of these was made, because they're made a little bit differently, but they all have a couple of things in common. So let's just look at these. The one on the left is the embossing folder, just straight embossing. The one in the middle is using the embossing folder and one of the dies that comes with the hybrid embossing folder products. And then this third one is taking the center piece and going one step further with another die. And it's got an awful lot of detail in it. It's really gorgeous. So I want to show you, I've already talked to you about how I've done this piece, which is very, very straightforward. We all know how to do embossing, but let's talk about these two and how these two are done. I'm going to start with the one on the left, and I'm going to bring out the embossing folder, and I'm going to bring out the dies. So I've opened up the embossing folder. I'm going to grab the dies. And one thing with the dies that isn't super obvious when you're looking at the catalog is how many dies you get in the set. There are a lot. Many of them are the typical ones that go around the images, the stamped images. You have the holly leaves, you have the poinsettias, you have a lot of different pieces that you can use. But what's not showing for stamps are the larger images that we see here. For example, this die and this die. I'm going to bring these two out, and I'm actually going to put these dies to the side. But there are quite a few. There are 16 dies that come in that set, and they really are very handy. This is another thing that I find very handy when I'm working with dies, because inevitably I lose dies. I lose dies, I lose stamps, I lose embellishments, I lose everything. And I bet you do too. This is a super cheap frame that I picked up at Walmart. I think it's an 8x10 maybe. And I took a piece of the magnetic backing that has the adhesive side, and I just put that straight down onto that photo frame. And now I have a place where I can put my dies, and it's harder to lose this. I guess I probably could, and I wouldn't be surprised if I would. If you saw the disaster that you can't see on camera in this room, you might not be shocked to think that I could lose the picture frame, but at least it's a little bit bigger. All right, so I'm going to take this die. This is the die that works with the hybrid embossing folder. And what you want to do with this is you want to open your folder. I can read Stampin' Up! Here. When you open that folder up and you just pop it up, you're going to put your die on top of the image. And I'm trying to move that die, but there is a kind of a raised edge that's the exact same shape as this die. And when I take a piece of paper and I put that paper into the folder, and I just fold that over. If I run this through my die cutting machine, and I'm using this as a die now, not as an, no, I'm sorry, my mistake. I'm using this as an embossing folder. So forget what I just said. I'm still using it as the 3D embossing folder. So if you have the Stampin' Up! Embossing die cutting machine, you're going to use plate number 4. If you have an old plate that you use for your 3D embossing folders, you're going to use that. So you can think of this as a 3D embossing folder that also has a die in it. And you're going to run that through. And when you do, what you're going to end up with, I know this is a different color cardstock than what I just showed you, but you're going to end up with this piece. So it is cut on the outside, and then it has a beautiful image on the inside. And that's what you get when you run that through using the embossing folder and the die. You just put that right through and you get that image. Now, the other thing you can do is you can also take the die and just run that through. And I'll show you a couple of ways to use this piece when we look at how to put a card together. So you can see the difference here. You can see the one on the left is embossed. The one on the right is simply a die cut. So what I did to create the piece on the right is I treated this like a die. This is not an embossing folder. And I just ran it through my die cutting machine like I would with any other die. So a couple of ways that you can use this die. The next thing that you can do with these dies, which is really, really cool, is you can take the piece that you have as a result of using the embossing folder and the die. So again, just to remind you, you would put the die right in here. Just trying to get it settled. There we go. So it's settled on those ridges. You put the paper, fold that over, run it through, and you get this piece. And then there, you can take the piece that is created from this combination and change it from this view into this view. And let's just look at the difference. If I hold these up a little bit toward the camera, they started with the same piece, but this side has much more detail that is cut out in between the different leaves, and also right around the frame. There are more pieces that are cut out. The border, that little thin border that's right around all the foliage, is also gone. The way to do that is if you take the piece that you cut out, again, using the embossing folder and the die that goes right into the embossing folder, what you're going to do is you're going to take the second die, the second large die that is in the set, and this die will fit directly on top of the piece that I cut out with the embossing folder and the outline die. And it's really nice because it's very similar to the outline die, in that when I put this on top of what I cut out, it's not moving. It fits in. It's like a multi-layered jigsaw puzzle, and it just, it tightly fits right around that, so it's not going to move. And if you pop that right into your die cutting machine, and this is a die, this is not an embossing folder, so you're going to run that through just like a die, the piece that comes out is going to look like that. So there are multiple ways that you can use the embossing folder and the dies that come with the embossing folder. So again, let me just kind of pull these back in, and I'm going to quickly just repeat the way to make these three pieces, which are all very similar, but are also very different. And the best way to get used to these and how they work is to just practice and just to see what it is that you like. So let's talk about that one again. The one on the left, very, very straightforward. We all do this. Embossed, 3D embossing folder. Make sure you use the right plates for a 3D embossing folder, and you get a beautifully embossed image. If you want to go a step further, use that embossing folder and take the outline die, the one that has, I always have to futz around with this just to make sure I have it on the right side. The blade is facing up, and I'm putting that right on that image. I'm going to put my paper on top, run that through my die cutting machine. I'm still treating this like an embossing folder, so I'm going to make sure that I use the right plates for an embossing folder. And what I will get is the image in the middle. Again, it's gorgeous, and this is just a beautiful, beautiful piece that you can use. And then if you want to go one step further, you start with what we just talked about. And instead of using the outline die, you're going to use this very detailed die. And you're going to place that right over the top of the image that we just discussed. So this is the one that would have come out of the embossing and outline die. You're going to take that and you're going to use the detail die and just put that right on the top, put that through your embossing machine, and you're going to end up with this beautiful, beautiful piece. So when I first saw the price of the embossing folders and the dies, I thought, wow, that looks a little bit expensive. But when I really took a couple of minutes and thought through what I can do with the dies, and also the fact that I'm not just getting dies that will cut the images that we just looked at, but I'm also getting a ton more dies that will work with the stamps. It actually is a pretty good deal. At least I think it is, because you definitely get a lot. Okay, so what do we do with these pieces? Well, there are a lot of options, and I want to talk a little bit, and I'm going to recreate a card, not exactly like this because I've cut out some different pieces, but I want to show you what I used and how I put this together and make a card a little bit differently as well. This is a basic A2 card, and I'm going to start making the new card with an A2 base. It's a little hard to see since it's white on white. I think I will move that piece of paper away just for a moment. So this is just a regular old A2 base. It's 8.5 by 5.5, scored at 4 1/4 on the 8.5 inch side. And for this one, I'm doing a landscape because I am going to be bringing in sentiments that are going to work better on a landscape. You could definitely switch this to a portrait and have an image or whatever you want in the middle, because this still looks gorgeous with a wreath kind of in that portrait view as well. But I'm going to go ahead and do the landscape. So my first layer on this card is a piece of cherry cobbler that I ran through an embossing folder. I'm going to change things up just a little bit on the card that I'm going to do. And honestly, I don't know exactly where this is going to go because I just cut up some pieces of paper before starting the stamp club this afternoon, and we're going to see if they work. This is a piece of cherry cobbler. Cherry cobbler is one of my absolutely favorite colors to use for holidays, for Valentine's Day, for autumn birthday cards. I just love it. It is a gorgeous, gorgeous red. This is cut to about a 1/16 of an inch less than 5.5 by 4 1/4. So I just backed off a smidge when I cut this out because I wanted a very, very, very small white border going all the way around. And then I decided I want to see what this looks like with some designer series paper in the background. And I'm not going to commit yet to what side I'm going to put down because I want to see how the colors are going to build. But this is from the Painted Christmas designer series paper, and I love the colors. I'm hoping, I'll be honest with you, we will see, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to use this side because I love it. I know that a lot of it is going to get hidden because of the size of the images that I'm going to put in the middle, but we're going to see. So I have some other pieces that I cheated and I cut out beforehand that I think I'm going to use, but I want to figure this out as I go. And let me show you two of them. And you know how I made these because of what we talked about a couple of minutes ago. The reason that I made two is, let me bring in the original card. If I pull up some of the front, you can see that garden green piece in the back. On this card, that garden green piece was cut out simply using the outline die. And it's really nice because it's a little bit bigger than the detail. When we get to this level, it's a little bit bigger than the detail. So it has a nice kind of frame of color. Well, these are the same size. And the only difference was after I cut this one out, I thought, you know what, maybe I need one that is created using the embossing folder and this big die, just so that I have some kind of pop of the design. Either way, I'm going to use one of these two as the background in my card. It's not going to make a heck of a lot of difference. So I'm just going to see what this looks like. And again, I'm not committing yet, although I think I know where I'm going. I'm not committing to what side of that designer series paper I'm going to use, because I'm not quite sure where we're going to end up on all of these pieces. And then I cut out a couple more of the pieces that have the detail cut out. I use some metallic paper here. This is more of a kind of a coppery color. It is absolutely gorgeous. And all the detail you get in that using the detailed die, you remember this is cut with a detailed die, is just phenomenal. And then I thought, well, what would it look like in vellum? And it's really pretty. It looks like it has kind of snow on it. It's really, really gorgeous. So I'm going to mess around and figure out what I want to do on this card. And there are far too many options, which is a problem, maybe, or maybe not. Let's see. If I leave that designer series paper on that side, I like that because it's pulling in a lot of the reds. I'm just going to flip this over and see what it looks like. Yeah, I think I'm partial to the other. So I think I'm about to commit to that. And I like playing around with the pieces like this until I figure out what I want to do. So let's now see, what does this look like if I layer the gold on top? Oh, that's pretty. That's really nice. And now I have some options. I mean, this is all option based, right? Since I'm using the piece that is embossed on the bottom, I can get 2 layers of foliage on this. And I've got a choice. I can turn this around so that the same design is on both layers and kind of layer them one on top of the other. And that looks nice because it has a nice outline around. The green is the border behind the bronze. Or I can turn this around and I can get even one more layer underneath. I kind of like that as well. I think it's really full. I think it adds a lot of really good dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and commit myself here. And step 1, all right, I'm taking the plunge. I'm going to lay this down. This is how I make cards. I cut things out that I think are going to go together well. And then I start just playing around and seeing what works well on different layers, how I want everything to go together. I love this paper. I always triple check to make sure I have my card oriented the way that I want. And I don't have to commit completely by putting this down because I can still figure out if I want to layer the bronze on the same pattern or if I want to offset it. And what I'm going to do on this piece is I'm just putting glue in the middle. I want the edges to have the ability to kind of float a little bit so that if I want to add some things underneath, I can do that. And I'm eyeballing the lines on the framed part in the middle. And I am moving them in every direction just to make sure that visually they look straight. And that's a really good tip, because if you move it around on all four sides and just make sure that it looks pretty straight, visually it's probably going to end up being pretty straight. Okay. And now the big question. Do I want that to go like that so that I have the second layer underneath? Do I want it to go so that it is framing the outside? And that's what I did on this card. So since I did that already on this card, I'm going to change this up just because I can. And I've also got other options. If I wanted to bring in, I could use red on top of the green. I could also do the vellum directly on top, which is also very pretty. Darn it, these are all pretty. Darn it, darn it, darn it. Oh, too many choices here. Too many choices. Now I have this crazy idea. That's a little too much. Darn it, I like that too. All right, well, I'm going to come back and use those in a minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this piece on, and I'm going to orient it so that it is not directly the same pattern. Why not, right? I mean, this is just an example. And if I don't like it, I'll make a different one in a different way. And all I'm doing here, just like I did on that other piece, I'm making sure that this line is straight-ish and trying to get it sort of centered-ish. I'm going to move that down. I can actually see the line underneath on the green. This is why I use Tombow, so I can move things around. I'm going to move that over and scooch and move that around again. Okay, we're getting there. Oh, that's pretty. That's really pretty. Now, here comes some of the fun, at least some of the fun that I had on the other card. So let's kind of correlate these two. The soft succulent green is equivalent to the garden green. That was my first layer on this card. The brass color is equivalent to the basic white. And then what I started doing is I had a couple other pieces that I had cut out and I used them for filler. So one was the evening evergreen. The evening evergreen started like a piece like this, and then I just cut off some pieces. And then on the other one that I did, the metallic also started as a whole piece, and I cut off some of the little parts and I used them for filler. So I'm going to do that this time, but I'm going to use some of the vellum, and I'm just going to cut it right on the outside of the frame. And then I'm going to use the very technical tool of Scotch tape to get a couple of these images on my card as a contrast to the colors and the shapes that are already on the card. And what's nice is I don't need to be super, super careful. For example, I'm going to use this leaf here. And this is a nice area that needs a little bit more decoration. So I'm just trimming that off, and I'm going to pop that right in there. And I'm going to use just a little bit of tape. And that's going to hold that down. I'm going to come back and I'm going to glue these down later. I'm just going to add a couple more. I don't want to bore you to tears as you watch me put some of this on. These are also really fun if you take the corners and you can kind of bring them in a little bit and give a little bit of layer right over those holly leaves. And it doesn't have to match up perfectly either. And we're going to use a little tape just to hold that down. Just building a couple of layers. I don't want too much. I don't want it to get too overwhelming because then it will look like it's not intentional. And that will also look nice with a couple little holly leaves. Make sure I have that on the right side, and I do. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and put those down with a little bit of tape, and it will give it some dimension. All right. And I'm going to very quickly do the same thing with the red piece that I have. And I'm going to do my best to save the inside of one of these pieces that I am cutting, and you'll see why in just a minute. That's going to be used as part of our design, but that will come when we're putting sort of the last piece on the top. Just cutting around here. I really like these leaves. They're not too much, but they give a nice little pop, and the detail from the embossing folder is really, really pretty. So this one, that'll look pretty down there. Just cutting off a couple of the little excess pieces that I don't want. And bringing in a little more tape. And this looks like a muddy mess right now, but hopefully in a couple minutes you will see that that muddy mess is going to go away. And just grab another little bit. Trying to find a place where a little bit of color, and I don't need to bring out too much. I can hide some of the pieces that I'm really not going to use that much. I'm just going to put that down, and I'll do one more tiny piece of red, and then I'm going to call it, because otherwise it's going to get a little too much. So we'll do a little bit of holly and save the rest of the piece that you cut out from the embossing folder, because you'll probably be able to use it on another project. So don't throw that away. Now that looks like a muddy mess. I agree, if that's what you're thinking. But eventually what we're going to have is we're going to have our sentiment that's going to be in the middle, and it should all kind of come together. So what I decided to do for this sentiment is I pretty much mimicked what I did on here. I really like that saying. I like using Christmas. So I like Joyful Christmas to You and Yours. That is in the collection. And it is just really a nice sentiment, I think, to use for this particular card. Now, you can go back and use the center that you had on the pieces that were cut out as kind of a background. And the reason I like doing this, two reasons. One is this acts as a really nice barrier between your mess, because when we decide what we're going to put here, we're just going to literally glue that right down. And that way, when I add dimensionals to this piece, if somebody sneaks a peek underneath, they will not see the tape. They're just going to see a really nice piece of paper that is right there. And I'm happy with the red. I know I've got more red here, but I'm good with the red because I'm trying to pull some of that red color in. And all I'm going to do before I tack that down is just do a little bit of trimming. There were a couple places where my scissors were not necessarily super straight. And I'm not going to be too persnickety because this is going to end up kind of being hidden. Nobody's really going to pay a lot of attention to it. And I'm just going to go ahead and glue that right down. And you can use whatever kind of glue you want. I find that when you put glue directly on top of metallic paper, like I'm going to be, it takes just a minute or two to sit or set. It's not the same porous paper that we use for cardstock. So, you know, be a little patient. I'm not going to sit here for long, but it's going to take just a minute or so to get that so that it's not going to move. And it will definitely adhere to the tape. So that's not a problem. When I stamped the image for the middle, I did stamp, like I said, on some more of the Painted Christmas Designer Series paper. And then to cut out that piece, I used one of the dies that comes in the set. It's a stitched rectangle, and it is perfect. It is perfectly sized so that if you were to put it inside that piece that you cut out, you're going to have the die piece centered. And if you know me, and you know me well, I love stitched dies. So I really like that die. And I'm going to dress it up just a tad like I did on this one. I thought it would be fun to make this sort of look like a Christmas present being opened. Don't ask me why. I thought that was a good idea, but I did. So I'm using some of the Elegant trim, and I'm just going to wrap that around the back. Again, use the very sophisticated tool of Scotch tape, and then bring it around the side and then around the other opposite corner. And when I do that, I'm going to tape a couple of places just to make sure that that twine decides it does not want to move. So I've got that top, and now I've got the bottom piece. And I'm also going to tape it a little bit close to the edge. Again, I just don't want this to move once it's set. And then right around the bottom. I just thought this would be kind of fun. It definitely pulls some of the metallic together, and then take my little snips and snip off the excess. I don't know why, but I think that's very elegant, very pretty. And I'm going to use dimensionals on this to give it a little bit of a pop. I'm purposely making sure that some of the dimensionals are going across where I have the tape. That way there's little chance that that tape is going to come off and that my twine is going to unwind. And then I'm also going to cut one of these in half and put it pretty much in the middle so that it doesn't sag. So right sort of in there. I need to order some more dimensionals. I go through these so much. I'm very happy when I get a paper pumpkin kit because inevitably they have dimensionals, and I never use all the dimensionals in the kit when I'm making the project. So I always have some that are left. And I really like the ones too that are the black dimensionals. They're awesome for hiding some backs on some projects. So again, I'm making sure that I know what is the bottom, what is the top, and I'm just going to go in and try to, I may need to look at this on straight on a little bit. and get that as centered as I can. And then if you want to add a little bit more, what I decided I was going to do to continue with the metallic theme on this card, I did a double bow with the same twine, and I put that on the bottom right. And I think I showed you this a little bit ago. I used the shimmery crystal effects to tack that right on the top. That's going nowhere. That is nice and tight. And then I put a few of the brushed metallic adhesive back dots on the card. And I'm going to go ahead and do that on this card. I just think that there are a couple places that we could pull in the metallics just a tad, like up in here. I think a little bit of metallic would look pretty. I'm going to do gold. I love these. I got a couple more of these a few weeks ago because I will definitely be adding some bling to some of these cards. And then maybe a small gold one as well, just sort of tucked. And since I left these so that the ends are not tied down, I can tuck things up and underneath if I want to, which is also a lot of fun. All right. Well, I hope you have enjoyed learning a little bit more about how to use the hybrid embossing folder and dies that come with the, or correspond, I should say, with the Merriest Moments stamp set. They are really, really fun to use. And again, the pieces that I really wanted to highlight are the embossing folder, the outline die, and the detail die, and how those work together. If you do have these products and make your cards, I would really love to see them. And I hope that you consider giving these products a try. I think you will really enjoy making cards with them. They are a lot of fun. So thank you so much. And until next time, happy stamping.